Hey guys, tonight we are slipping barefoot through the polished marble floors of a Mughal palace, where the shadows fall like velvet and the lamps flicker in a sleepy glow. You step softly past lattice windows, over carpets hand-woven so tightly they feel like silk, and through corridors scented with rosewater. You are not a noble, a warrior, or even a scribe. No, tonight, you're something much stranger. You are a royal bed warmer. And no, that job title isn't a metaphor. Now, you probably won't survive this gig. Because sleeping in someone else's bed before they do? In a palace full of political intrigue, that's a risk few would envy. If you got the temperature wrong, too cold or too warm, or if, heaven forbid, you carried in an illness, well, let's just say the Mughal emperors were not known for their second chances. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Underscore 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 underscore. You trudge toward the emperor's chambers, a woolen blanket draped around your shoulders. In your arms, a brick, still warm from the palace kitchen fire. It's late, only the hiss of oil lamps and the gentle splash of fountains accompany your footsteps. You pass through a series of carved archways, each guarded by eunuchs with serious expressions and heavy silk tunics. Your job? Simple, terrifying. The emperor's bed must be exactly the right temperature. Not too warm, he hated to sweat. Not too cold, he loathed to shiver. You lay the warm brick under the silk sheets, then crawl into the bed yourself, rolling slowly from side to side to distribute the heat evenly. Historians still argue whether these bed warmers were chosen for their slight builds, easier to hide, or their resistance to gossip, harder to blackmail. The bed itself is an imperial affair, thick layers of cotton batting, silk sheets dyed in indigo and crimson, and embroidered cushions that smell faintly of cardamom and saffron. You shift carefully, not wanting to leave creases. Every movement is slow, methodical. A wrinkle in the sheets might displease His Majesty and call into question your loyalty, your skills, even your life expectancy. By the way, this wasn't a job for the lowliest servants. No, this was an honor of sorts. Bed warmers had access to the emperor's private chambers, saw glimpses of his private life, maybe even heard snippets of his sleep-muttered secrets. To the court's tangled web of power-hungry officials, that made you someone worth noticing, and someone worth eliminating. Cozy, right? The palace, built by master architects using shimmering white marble and red sandstone, was a labyrinth of secret staircases, echoing corridors, and hidden doors. Every whisper carried, every shadow concealed a potential threat. And here you were, lying under the emperor's covers, surrounded by priceless inlays of jade and lapis lazuli, your only job to be a human hot water bottle. Imagine explaining that on your resume. Some emperors reportedly had multiple bed warmers, one for each corner of the bed, to ensure uniform heat. Others preferred their bed warmer to be young and nimble, believing that youth somehow carried with it a purity of purpose. Historians still argue whether this preference was due to genuine superstition or just a convenient excuse for paranoia. There's a light joke among the palace staff, though no one dares say it above a whisper, sleep like the emperor, but pray you never warm his bed. Because if the emperor had a bad night's sleep, if he woke with a chill or a sweat, the blame would trace back to the last body in his bed before him, and that was you. Even the palace cats, who lounged lazily on mosaic floors, seemed to understand better than to get too close to the emperor's chambers after dark. You rise carefully, fold back the sheet just so, remove the brick, lest the emperor burn his royal toes, and bow deeply to the empty room. Your work is done, but the tension in your back won't loosen until sunrise. And even then, you know you'll trudge back to your quarters wondering whether today will be the day the emperor's cupbearer delivers not just tea, but a polite, lethal summons. Still, as strange jobs go, it's not the worst. At least you're indoors. At least you get silk sheets. And who knows, if you play your cards right, you might warm beds for long enough to warm your way into a more comfortable, less perilous position, like mango ripener. But that, my friend, is a story for another section. You shuffle your sore legs out of the Emperor's bedchamber, still feeling the weight of responsibility, or was that just the imprint of the brocaded mattress on your back? Either way, your next task in this endless maze of peculiar palace duties isn't yours to bear, but someone else's nightmare to live. You hear the faint jingle of little bells. No, not a royal procession. It's the perfume sprayer patrol on the move. You catch a glimpse of them as they glide down the corridor, looking both absurd and majestic. Each member holds an ornate, flower-shaped nozzle attached to a slim silver pump. These aren't just air fresheners in funny hats, they are the olfactory sentinels of the Mughal court, tasked with maintaining an atmosphere so fragrant it could mask the sweaty terror of political betrayal. Their sprayers release a gentle mist, a concoction of rosewater, musk, sandalwood, and the occasional experimental whiff of civet. The mix isn't random, it's a matter of serious, almost religious ceremony. The perfume sprayer patrol had to know the Emperor's preferred scent for different times of day. Morning? Light jasmine. Afternoon? A heartier blend with patchouli. Evening? Frankincense with just a dab of vetiver, to match the sunset. Historians still argue whether the perfume concoctions were meant for pleasure, or whether they served a deeper, more paranoid function, masking the smell of poison, decay, or simply fear. It turns out that if you spritz enough rosewater around a rotting corridor or a guilty conscience, things seem a little less grim. As you trail behind, careful not to intrude, you notice how the sprayers work in unison, like dancers in a ritualistic ballet. They sway their nozzles to and fro, stepping lightly, never hurrying, never dawdling. The robes they wear are color-coded, pale blue for morning duty, deep indigo for night shifts. And stitched into their sleeves, small sachets of extra potpourri, just in case of emergencies. Spilled wine? Overcooked mutton stew? Overambitious courtiers who wore too much musk? Sprayers to the rescue. Now, the real marvel lies not just in the spritzing but in the snobbery. You couldn't just become a perfume sprayer. No, you had to apprentice for years under a master perfumer, learning the volatile moods of oils and extracts, how they reacted to heat, to skin, even to silk. An unwise spritz could leave a damp stain on precious cloth, a faux pas worse than a diplomatic insult. You imagine what it's like being one of them, hovering respectfully as the Emperor dines, discreetly misting the air when a particularly noxious minister approaches, ensuring the throne room smells not of fear or ambition but of bergamot and blooming gardens. There's even a record, hidden in the less-traveled corners of Mughal court documents, that a perfume sprayer once caught a would-be assassin by noticing the absence of sin on his person. The man had bathed in milk, seeking to scrub away all oils, scents, and traces that might betray him. Clever, but not clever enough for a professional nose trained to detect even the absence of smell. Historians still argue whether the Emperor Aurangzeb curtailed the practice later in his reign, deeming it frivolous. Yet many insist he secretly missed it, evidenced by reports that his court still faintly smelled of rose petals long after he abolished the perfumed patrols. As you breathe in the lingering wake of their passage, a warm, comforting haze of flowers and spices, you can't help but chuckle. A city outside the palace walls might stink of camels and unwashed linen, but here, even the air wore jewelry. The sprayers vanish around a gilded corner, leaving the marble floors glistening with fine mist. You linger a moment longer, feeling a strange envy. Their job might sound ridiculous, but it's steady work. No bed-warming politics. No fear of sudden nighttime summons. Just you, your silver nozzle, and a cloud of lavender-scented safety. And as you sigh, preparing to return to your own strange duties, you make a mental note: if this palace life ever turns sour, maybe, just maybe, you'll apply for the night shift on the perfume sprayer patrol. After all, a person could do worse than being paid to spritz sandalwood in a place where survival often depends on staying 2 steps ahead and 1 cent behind. You move along, still savoring the lingering haze of jasmine and sandalwood, when you stumble, almost literally, into another oddity of palace life, a curtain, shifting ever so slightly though there's no breeze. You peer closer and realize there's a figure behind it, small and deliberate, adjusting the folds with the reverence of a monk tending sacred relics. Congratulations, you found the curtain whisperer. No, not an overworked housekeeper. This was a full-fledged court position. Curtain whisperers were responsible for ensuring that every hanging tapestry, every embroidered velvet drape, every gauzy silk panel looked effortless and elegant, at all times. Imagine a giant, imperial Instagram feed, except the stakes were much higher. An uneven fold? A shadow where none should fall? These things could be interpreted as omens, and omens could topple ministers. Your new friend here is silently tugging a hem a fraction of an inch higher, smoothing the edge to capture the precise play of sunlight streaming through the latticed jolly screens. Mughal palaces were designed for drama, shafts of light, gleaming marble, gold filigree that caught the sun. But it all depended on the curtains behaving correctly. Historians still argue whether this role originated from actual court superstition, believing that rumpled curtains could anger the gods, or if it was just another excuse for the palace elite to flex their absurd control over their environment. Either way, curtain whisperers thrived. You can't just throw a fabric over a rod and call it a day. No, the curtain whisperer had to account for season, time of day, and even the emotional climate of the court. Morning period? Heavy, dark folds with minimal sway. Royal wedding? Lighter silks, playful and billowy. Incoming dignitaries from Persia? You'd better believe those curtains would flutter just enough to suggest elegance without impropriety. There's even evidence, preserved in a few crusty scrolls tucked deep in Mughal archives, that curtain whisperers were schooled in basic meteorology. They could predict air currents within the vast stone halls and calculate where the fabrics would move naturally. They worked in teams, too. One whispered and adjusted. The other watched from strategic corners, squinting into the ambient light to catch rogue creases or shadows. And this wasn't just about aesthetics. Curtains shielded the harem from curious eyes, marked the invisible boundaries of power in court ceremonies, and softened the harshness of marble and stone. They were, quite literally, the fabric of palace life. A badly positioned drape could ruin the emperor's mood for an entire day, or worse, trigger a tantrum that might lead to a few unfortunate dismissals, or executions. Today's curtain whisperer is adjusting a crimson brocade panel embroidered with gold threads so fine it catches your eye and refuses to let go. As he steps back, satisfied, you notice something, pinned discreetly to his belt, a tiny, thin stick, an early lint roller of sorts, used to remove dust and stray threads. It's details like these that kept him alive and employed. A missed speck might seem trivial to you, but to a man with absolute power and a lot of downtime? Fatal mistake. The whisperer glances up and gives you a small, secretive nod, as if to say, yes, this job is absurd, but it is mine, and I'm very good at it. You nod back, half in admiration, half in sympathy. At least he isn't crawling into royal beds like you. Still, part of you wonders, did he dream of someday being a perfumer? Or a falconer? Or did he go to sleep each night thinking of nothing but the perfect, silent sway of silk? You smile to yourself, stepping past the perfectly framed curtain, wondering if anyone outside these gleaming walls would ever believe that a man could spend his life making sure a breeze looked beautiful. One last thing before you move on, those heavy curtains. They also helped hide drafts in the winter and cooled the hallways in the blistering Delhi summers. Practical and beautiful. You have to give it to the Mughal court, they didn't just appreciate luxury. They demanded it obey physics. And with that thought, you tiptoe away from the curtain whisperer, careful not to disturb his masterpiece, and head deeper into the palace, where even stranger jobs await. You wind your way down a quieter corridor, past wall panels shimmering with mother-of-pearl inlays, and think to yourself, surely the curtain whisperer has to be the strangest palace employee. But no, this next one is stranger still. You hear the faint clatter of a loom, the soft whisper of thread passing through calloused fingers. Tucked behind a half-open door, you find the harem seamstress spy at work. Now, you might assume her job is simple, stitch silken tunics and embroider scarves with gold thread for the royal harem. And yes, she does that. Beautifully, in fact. But that's only half her role. The other half? Gathering every bit of scandalous gossip the emperor's concubines, wives, and daughters let slip as they lounge and chatter, assuming the seamstress is too focused on her stitches to notice. Historians still argue whether seamstresses were intentionally recruited for their skills and subterfuge, or if it just evolved naturally from being invisible. Either way, by the time you've spent 6 hours a day sewing hems at the feet of royalty, you're practically a walking, breathing information vault. The loom is an intricate affair, threads stretched taut like the very nerves that must have buzzed through this woman's mind each day. She works with hands steady and sure, weaving a pattern so complex it looks almost like a labyrinth, a fitting metaphor, really. The harem was its own maze of relationships, jealousies, alliances, secret romances, political ambitions stitched invisibly beneath layers of muslin and brocade. You edge closer. The seamstress never looks up, but you notice her fingers pause for just a second as two young women pass by, giggling and murmuring in Persian. Something juicy, perhaps? She gives the slightest tilt of her ear and then resumes her work, slipping the overheard morsel into the tapestry of secrets she's quietly collecting. And the garments she makes? Oh, they are more than clothes. Each stitch must please royal tastes as diverse as the empire itself. Bright silks for Hindustani princesses, subdued cottons for Persian queens, and translucent veils so light they seem woven from smoke. Quality was life or death here. An uneven hem could get you banished. A botched embroidery might inspire a royal tantrum. And in the harem, a tantrum could ripple outward to court politics faster than you could say textile espionage. But it wasn't just about listening. The harem seamstress spy had to be clever, too, knowing what to report, when to report it, and how to stitch the truth into a tale convincing enough for palace ministers to act upon. Too much gossip and you risked exposure, too little, and you were useless. One popular theory, still hotly debated among historians, is that some seamstresses deliberately sowed rumors, using their status to steer court affairs subtly, like seamstresses tugging a thread here, a stitch there, until they reshaped the entire garment of the empire. In a place where royal succession could hinge on whispers, the woman with the needle might wield more power than the man with the sword. The seamstress before you adjusts a spindle of golden thread, and you notice her hands are callous, but her nails are perfectly clean, another sign of her double life. She had to be neat enough to pass scrutiny, but rough enough to seem forgettable. One footnote before you move on: many of the most beautiful Mughal garments, ones that dazzled foreign ambassadors and artists alike, likely came from hands like hers, working quietly in secret, embroidering peacock feather patterns and curling vines onto silk, all while threading strands of courtly intrigue between the stitches. You watch her tie off a knot with a deft flick, tuck her tools into a wooden box carved with tiny floral motifs, and rise soundlessly. Her day's work of sewing and spying complete, she slips into the maze of the harem like a ghost among curtains. You're left staring at the half-finished robe shimmering on the loom, wondering what stories it might silently carry to the emperor's ear. And as you step away, it occurs to you, some of the finest seams in history were stitched with secrets. You press on, the heavy scent of sandalwood growing richer as you move toward an open courtyard. There, among the chattering of parrots and the glint of gilded cages, you find yet another peculiar character, the keeper of the royal parrots. Yes, parrots. Dozens of them. Some perched proudly on golden stands, others fluttering their green wings inside jewel-encrusted cages. And each one looked at you as if it had several deeply compromising things to say, and frankly, they probably did. The keeper sits on a low stool, one hand calmly scattering seeds, the other scribbling something on a tiny scroll. It might surprise you to learn that the parrots weren't kept for amusement alone. Oh no, these were not your average squawking nuisances. Mughal emperors valued parrots for their intelligence, mimicry, and, more importantly, their talent for carrying and repeating information. Historians still argue whether the parrots were genuinely used to eavesdrop and repeat court gossip, or if this is simply one of those deliciously absurd myths historians love to debate over tea. Still, the fact remains, these birds had been trained to repeat phrases. Useful ones. Political ones. Sometimes even dangerously seditious ones. The keeper's role was critical. Not only did he have to keep the birds healthy, an impressive feat when your charges insisted on delicate snacks like pomegranate seeds and cardamom, but he also had to carefully monitor what they said. Imagine the nightmare if a parrot accidentally repeated a prince's treasonous joke, or mimicked the emperor's snore in front of visiting dignitaries. It was a strange kind of espionage. One that required patience, keen ears, and an endless supply of snacks. The keeper would walk the halls with his birds, letting them pick up on the general hum of court life. If they overheard something juicy, the bird might repeat it later. Of course, this practice had its hazards. Parrots are notoriously unreliable witnesses, prone to mixing up names, exaggerating insults, and, on occasion, simply inventing things to stay interesting. A particularly famous incident, at least according to Mughal court anecdotes, recounts a parrot that loudly proclaimed the emperor's beard hides 1,000 lies, at a banquet. The poor bird's fate is unknown, but you can guess it wasn't showered with millet and praise afterward. You stand a respectful distance away as the keeper offers a plump, glossy parrot a sliver of mango. The bird cocks its head, gives you a beady-eyed glare, and squawks, "Long live His Majesty," unless he's sleeping, before bursting into a cackling laugh. You coughed to hide a smile. Humor was dangerous here. The keeper, unflappable, jots something else on his scroll. He wears simple robes, more practical than decorative, and sandals worn thin from pacing the courtyards day after day. His belt holds not a dagger but a small pouch filled with bird treats, a tiny comb for preening, and a rolled-up list of forbidden phrases, words the birds must never repeat, lest the court descend into chaos. There's something almost monastic about his work, you think. Watching, listening, feeding, training, and always maintaining the fragile boundary between entertainment and disaster. Before you move on, you catch another parrot bobbing on its perch, shrieking the mangoes are late again. A reference, you're told, to a famously disastrous banquet when unripe mangoes nearly caused a diplomatic incident. Apparently, parrots never forget. You give the keeper a nod of silent respect. His job might look whimsical, but beneath the feathers and chatter was a dangerous web of politics. Managing courtiers was hard. Managing courtiers with wings? Practically an art form. And as you turn away, the sound of fluttering wings and mischievous squawks follows you. In a palace where words could kill, sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't a whisper from a rival, it was a repeat from a parrot. Leaving the courtyard full of scheming feathers behind, you head down another passage, this one lined with latticed stone that filters the late afternoon sun into dappled shadows. The scent here changes again, a smoky sweetness curling through the halls. You follow it until you arrive at a small, darkened chamber where another palace employee is bent over his tools. Meet the chief hookah purifier. No, not just any servant with a rag and a bucket. This man is a craftsman, an engineer, an artist in the noble art of cleaning the emperor's hookah to imperceptible perfection. You might laugh, but you wouldn't dare laugh here. In the Mughal palace, a hookah wasn't just a hobby. It was a statement of power, leisure, and cultivated taste. The emperor's hookah had to be spotless, pure, a vessel for smoky perfection. Historians still argue whether the hookah was introduced to India during Akbar's reign or slightly later, but by Shah Jahan's time, yes, the same guy who commissioned the Taj Mahal, it had become a fixture of royal life. And someone had to maintain it. The chief hookah purifier's tools are spread before him, fine brushes carved from peacock feathers, delicate cloths embroidered with tiny lotuses, and slender pipes of silver and jade. He peers into the hookah's belly with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a rare gem. Every trace of old tobacco residue must be removed, every drop of stale water flushed away, every surface polished until it gleamed like a mirror. Not only did the emperor demand purity of flavor, he demanded consistency. One faulty puff could ruin his mood, and as you've learned, an emperor's bad mood had a ripple effect that could sink even the mightiest noble. Some emperors even tested the first draw themselves, suspiciously eyeing the hookah purifier like a hawk spotting a rabbit. As you watch, the purifier carefully lines the interior of the pipe with a thin sheen of rosewater, meant to cool the smoke and give it a floral undertone. A single misstep, too much water, not enough, the wrong balance of coals, could send him packing. Permanently. And the tobacco itself wasn't just any shredded leaf. No, it was a carefully guarded blend, infused with herbs, spices, even a bit of opium now and then for the truly decadent, though don't expect anyone to admit that in the royal chronicles. The purifier would prepare the mixture with the same gravity a priest prepares an offering, layering it just so, ensuring the flavors burned evenly without harshness or bitterness. One quirky detail? Some emperors insisted on ice cooling their hookah smoke, a luxury made possible only by shipments of ice blocks hauled from distant mountains and wrapped in wool to prevent melting. Yes, even in the sweltering Delhi summers. You can bet the hookah purifier lost sleep worrying about ice. The purifier wipes his hands meticulously after each step, ensuring not a trace of oil or sweat taints the sacred instrument. He moves like a surgeon, a ritual as much about precision as it is about fear. As with many courtly arts, there's an argument among historians. Was the hookah a true obsession or merely an affectation to impress visiting dignitaries? Some say it was political theater, clouds of perfumed smoke swirling lazily around as foreign envoys grew drowsy and agreeable. Others believe the emperors themselves were genuinely addicted to the ritual, finding in it a rare moment of calm amid the constant machinations of court life. You imagine the emperor reclining on his brocaded cushions later that evening, fingers idly tapping the mouthpiece, clouds of sweet smoke curling upward while ministers whisper their petitions. A flawless puff, a smooth draw, such small things, yet vital to maintaining the illusion of invincibility. The chief hookah purifier places the cleaned, polished hookah carefully on a silver tray, his face serene but his shoulders tense. The stakes are high. The smoke must billow just right, the flavor must please, and above all, the emperor must never, ever cough. You back away quietly. Some jobs in this palace are risky because of what you know. Others, like this one, are risky because of what you might fail to notice. Either way, it's survival by perfection. And as you leave the chamber, the faint aroma of burning clothes follows you, mingling with the memory of parrot gossip and whispering curtains. One more strange job ticked off the endless list of palace oddities, and you have a feeling even stranger ones await around the next marble corner. You weave through the narrowing corridors, your sandals slipping softly across the cool stone, and you can't help but think, surely you've seen the oddest jobs by now. But as you round a column, you stop short at a sight so delightfully bizarre it almost feels like a hallucination. There, under an awning of hand-painted silk, stands a man wrestling with what looks like an elephant-sized quilt. Meet the master of elephants' pajamas. Yes, elephants' pajamas. Go ahead and laugh softly to yourself, you're not alone. The Mughal emperors loved their elephants, adored them, in fact. Elephants weren't just status symbols, they were war machines, ceremonial vehicles, and diplomatic showpieces all in one thick skin package. And like any treasured possession, they were lavished with attention, including specially made garments for formal occasions, and apparently for bedtime, too. The master before you is supervising two assistants as they unfurl an enormous sheet of embroidered cotton, stitched with gold thread and intricate mandala patterns. The fabric gleams under the filtered sunlight, so massive it needs 6 men just to lay it flat. These are not mere blankets. These are custom-made, fitted elephant pajamas, lined for comfort and stitched to prevent chafing or irritation. Only the finest fabrics would do, lightweight muslins for summer, heavier velvets for winter, because even the emperor's elephants deserve to be seasonally fashionable. Historians still argue whether the pajamas were functional, meant to protect the elephants from cold and mosquitoes, or whether they were pure vanity projects, the Mughal equivalent of buying designer outfits for your pets. Either way, the tradition was so entrenched that records describe entire elephant wardrobes, complete with morning wear, parade regalia, and, yes, bedtime ensembles. You watch as the master holds up a giant, patented shape to fit an elephant's head, complete with embroidered designs along the rim and tiny, tinkling bells sewn into the edges. The bells, you're told, served a practical purpose. They scared away vermin and helped handlers track the elephant's movements at night. Plus, it must have been terribly fashionable for the emperor to brag that even his elephants jingled softly as they slept. Each elephant had its measurements carefully taken, just like any royal courtier. Weight fluctuations due to diet or season? Adjustments would be made. And not just by any tailor. The master of elephants' pajamas worked closely with the imperial stablemasters, ensuring that each piece of elephant sleepwear fit as perfectly as the emperor's own tunic. You sidle closer and notice the pajama master inspecting the stitching with a jeweler's loupe, frowning at a barely visible thread out of place. You think your last job review was stressful? Try explaining to an emperor why his favorite battle elephant developed a rash because you skimped on the cotton count. There's even a delightful footnote in one 17th century Persian account. Some elephants reportedly had favorite pajamas, preferring certain textures and even reacting poorly when denied their usual nightwear. Spoiled? Absolutely. But when you're hauling kings into battle and crushing your enemies underfoot, maybe you've earned the right to be picky about your bedtime outfit. As the assistants begin the long process of dressing a nearby elephant, an enormous, placid creature with wise eyes and surprisingly delicate movements, you can't help but chuckle quietly. The elephant raises its trunk lazily as if to say, "Yes, human, make me fabulous." One leg at a time, the massive garment is draped and fastened, the bells jingling softly. It's a strange dance, requiring coordination, patience, and no small amount of courage. Even the gentlest elephant could end a man with one careless step, but here they are, threading buckles, smoothing creases, and murmuring sweet nothings to calm the beast. You think about all the jobs you've seen so far, warming beds, spritzing perfume, adjusting curtains, and realize that palace life wasn't just about ceremony. It was about making the emperor's entire existence, every breath, every glance, every dream, an exercise in curated luxury. As you step away, giving the elephant one last admiring glance as it sways slightly under its gleaming nightwear. You wonder, when does service cross the line into theater? And when it does, who's the real performer, the king or the man who hems his elephant's pajamas? The warm jingle of the pajama-clad elephant fades behind you as you slip into another wing of the palace, this one quieter, colder, and unmistakably more serious. Here, amidst towering ledgers and heavy locks, resides another curious figure, the eunuch accountant. Now, you'd think accounting in a royal palace would already be strange enough: columns of numbers, endless inventories, secret ledgers tracking the emperor's whims. But the Mughal court wasn't content with the ordinary. They needed accountants who were utterly loyal, discreet, and incapable of leaving behind any inconvenient heirs. Hence, eunuchs. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were chosen for these positions because they were seen as more trustworthy, or because palace life was so steeped in paranoia that only someone permanently outside the bloodlines could be trusted with royal finances. Either way, the eunuch accountants held enormous power, quiet, patient power, hidden behind walls of ink and parchment. You step cautiously into the chamber. The smell of parchment and sandalwood oil tickles your nose. Seated at a low, lacquered desk is the accountant himself, a man of indeterminate age, his robes crisp, his face as unreadable as the ledgers in front of him. He dips a thin brush into ink and glides it across a palm-leaf ledger with the effortless precision of a man who knows the cost of a mistake better than most. The ledgers aren't merely lists of expenses and taxes. They're chronicles of the emperor's tastes, obsessions, and shifting moods. 500 rupees on a new emerald dagger? Noted. 1,000 on rare Iranian falcons? Carefully recorded. The unexpected doubling of the mango budget? Nothing escapes the eunuch accountant. You linger near the doorway, watching as he flips to a fresh page, sand dusting the wet ink to dry it. His gaze is sharp, calculating, not just at numbers but at people. After all, managing the emperor's wealth wasn't just about arithmetic. It was about survival. Embezzlement was tempting, sure. A few rupees here, a few there. But the penalty for being caught was swift and terminal. The eunuch accountant's job wasn't merely about keeping money, it was about keeping trust. In a way, they were the empire's invisible architects. Without their careful balancing of accounts, there would be no grand palaces, no jeweled peacock thrones, no lavish elephant pajamas. The Mughal court was a symphony of luxury, and someone had to conduct the finances behind the scenes. A little-known tidbit: some eunuch accountants rose so high they advised on policy itself, leveraging their control over the purse strings to influence military campaigns and diplomatic missions. They may have been silent in court, but they spoke volumes with their ledgers. Today's accountant pauses, blows gently on the drying ink, and then seals the page with a personal mark, a tiny, stylized peacock feather. Each accountant had a unique signature, not just for vanity, but for accountability. Forgery was a common enough crime. Personal marks made it harder, though not impossible, to frame a rival. You can't help but wonder if he ever schemes a little for himself. A ruby or two tucked inside a false bottom chest? Maybe. But more likely, he keeps his hands as clean as his conscience, because in the Mughal palace, survival wasn't about greed. It was about enduring. Historians still debate whether eunuchs wielded power openly or subtly, blending invisibly into the background until they held the real reins of influence. Either way, it's clear, in this labyrinth of silk, gold, and treachery, the ones who lasted longest weren't always the loudest or the flashiest. Sometimes, they were the quiet men with ink-stained fingers. You step back from the door just as the accountant looks up, his gaze cool and assessing. For a second, it feels like he's weighing your worth as easily as he weighs silver coins. Then, without a word, he turns back to his work, the soft scratch of his brush filling the silent chamber. As you walk away, you realize that in a palace obsessed with appearance, with scent, with show, there was still room for those who lived in shadows, counting quietly, and holding the real fortunes of the empire in their steady, unshakable hands. You turn a corner, the halls narrowing again as the palace folds inward on itself like an origami of opulence and secrecy. Here, the light dims, the walls thicken, and the air grows heavy with the scent of strange oils and herbal smoke. You've reached the domain of yet another unlikely specialist, the royal teeth dyer. Pause a moment to let that sink in. Yes, teeth dyer. In a palace where appearances were a kind of political currency, even teeth couldn't be trusted to simply be teeth. They had to be fashionable teeth. You shuffle closer, peeking through a beaded curtain into a small, tiled chamber, where a man in rich but stained robes hunches over a basin of black, viscous liquid. A young courtier sits before him, mouth open, a look of resigned patience on his face as the dye is painstakingly applied to his teeth with a tiny, precise brush. Historians still argue whether the teeth-dyeing practice was purely aesthetic or had ritual and medicinal roots. Some suggest it was believed to strengthen the enamel or ward off evil spirits, while others think it was simply about fashion, because nothing says power like a mouthful of jet-black teeth glinting in the candlelight. And black was the preferred color. In the Mughal court, white teeth were considered vulgar, common, animalistic. Black teeth? Now that suggested sophistication, restraint, an embrace of beauty that was subtle and controlled. The dye itself was a potent concoction of plant extracts, iron filings, and secret ingredients whispered about in suspicious tones. It wasn't without risk either. Too much iron could leave your gums inflamed. Too strong a mix and you risked more than just an awkward smile. You risked pain, infection, even the loss of a few pearly, or now ebony, whites. The teeth dyer dips his brush again, his hand steady. One mistake, one sloppy line, and the client could end up with a patchy grin, a nightmare in a court where a smile could be as political as a treaty. The courtier winces slightly as the cold liquid touches his gums, but he doesn't move. Only fools twitch under the teeth dyer's brush. There's even a quirky aside in one traveler's diary from the time. Some courtiers, desperate to keep up with trends, would chew specific barks and roots daily to maintain the dye between professional appointments, turning oral hygiene into something that resembled an alchemical ritual. Brushing was out, gentle polishing with cloth soaked in rosewater was in. You imagine the Mughal emperor, sitting atop his bejeweled throne, parting his lips to flash a mouthful of perfect, glistening black teeth. To an outsider, it might seem eerie, alien even, but to his courtiers and subjects, it was a dazzling display of refinement and authority. And the teeth dyer? He was as important to that image as the emperor's jeweler or tailor. A bad dye job could undermine an entire audience with foreign envoys. A perfect one could leave rivals rattled, convinced the emperor was not just powerful but immortal, invulnerable, untouchable. Of course, historians still debate whether the teeth-dyeing fad ever trickled down to the general public. Some argue it remains strictly a royal and noble eccentricity, a mark of status that the commoners wouldn't dare imitate. Others suggest that by the late 17th century, markets in cities like Agra and Delhi sold cheap teeth-dyeing kits to any ambitious merchant hoping to look a little more royal. The teeth dyer gently lifts the courtier's chin, inspecting his work. He wipes away a tiny smear from the corner of the mouth with a cloth soaked in rose oil, then signals he's done. The courtier bows slightly, a dangerous gesture mid-dye, and then shuffles away, his newly darkened smile hidden behind a modest hand. The teeth dyer doesn't look up. He's already preparing for the next appointment, humming softly as he grinds another batch of the inky paste. As you tiptoe away, you can't help but grin, carefully. Imagine a world where your dental appointments weren't about cavities or cleanings, but about fashion. Where a smile wasn't judged by its brightness, but by its darkness. In a palace where every detail mattered, even your grin had to be carefully curated. And as you move deeper into the Mughal labyrinth, you wonder what else these walls conceal, what other ordinary things have been twisted into elaborate, magnificent absurdities. You leave the lingering tang of herbal tooth dye behind, only to be drawn by an even stranger scent, a sharp blend of spices, roasted meats, and something faintly suspicious. Your stomach growls, but your brain knows better. You're approaching the lair of the banquet sniffers. Yes, sniffers. And not just any sniffers, these were the men who, quite literally, risked their noses to ensure that the emperor's feasts were safe to eat. Food tasters? Too obvious. By the time a dish touched the emperor's lips, it was too late. The banquet sniffers were the first, invisible line of defense. You find them stationed just outside the grand imperial kitchens, vast, smoky halls where copper pots the size of bathtubs simmer with rich biryanis, fragrant kebabs hiss on open grills, and sweet syrups bubble thickly over slow flames. The sniffers, in simple robes stained with turmeric and oil, are lined up like a somber inspection team. Their tools are rudimentary, brass spoons for lifting a sample, fine ceramic cups to waft steam toward their faces, and, of course, their highly trained noses. A sniffer dips a spoon into a golden stew, gives it a gentle swirl, and leans in, nostrils flaring delicately. Historians still argue whether these men were truly capable of detecting poison by scent alone or if their real job was to pick up the more pedestrian threats, spoilage, contamination, or the unmistakable tang of food gone off in the deli heat. Either way, the sniffers took their roles dead seriously. They were the bloodhounds of the Mughal culinary world. One sniffer leans in closer, his eyes narrowing as he detects something off. He calls over a junior cook, murmurs quietly, and the dish is whisked away, likely to meet a quiet end in the palace gardens. Better to lose a stew than a sovereign. The stakes were lethal. The Mughal court was a nest of vipers in silk. Plenty of rivals would have happily laced a curry or tampered with a sherbet to topple a political opponent. In fact, there's a lingering legend that the court chefs were trained to rotate recipes and ingredients constantly so that would-be assassins couldn't predict the menu and plan a toxin accordingly. And the sniffers? They had to memorize the safe, expected scents of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of dishes, sniffing out not just poison but any anomaly that could hint at tampering. You shift closer and notice one sniffer with a scarred lip and a missing thumb, a grim reminder that a career in palace sniffing wasn't without its occupational hazards. Some poisons couldn't be detected until it was too late. A faint headache, a little dizziness, and the sniffer would collapse before the emperor ever picked up his spoon. There's even a bizarre account, half legend, half history, that one emperor once employed a royal pigeon, trained to peck at suspect dishes before the sniffers ever approached. If the pigeon died, well, that answered that. Unfortunately, the pigeon wasn't great at distinguishing between poison and just undercooked lamb. The sniffer closest to you finishes his inspection and gives a barely perceptible nod. The dish passes. It will move onward, to the tasters next, and only after surviving their scrutiny will it be plated onto gold-inlaid dishes for the emperor's table. Banquet sniffers were a rare breed, cautious, methodical, and blessed with iron stomachs. You can't help but wonder how they trained. Did they start as apprentices, practicing on spoiled lentils and slightly soured milk, honing their senses until they could smell fear in a stew? Or did they volunteer, desperate for the prestige, knowing full well the risk was baked into the job description? Historians still bicker about whether the sniffers worked independently or were tied to the chefs themselves, an inbuilt failsafe, or even double agents, employed to ensure the chefs didn't get too creative. After all, in a world where flavor was king, a mediocre dish could be as deadly to a cook's career as a poison one. You take one last deep inhale as a pot of saffron rice is lifted past you, rich, buttery, and utterly safe, thanks to the man whose noses have saved emperors more times than history cares to remember. As you wander on, you're struck by a simple, sleepy thought: in this palace, even dinner could be a matter of life and death. And somewhere out there, probably right now, a banquet sniffer is inhaling his way into the history books, one cautious breath at a time. You amble away from the steamy kitchens and the iron-lunged sniffers, still marveling at the thought of someone whose nose could earn him more palace clout than a prince. You're deep in thought when a sudden burst of laughter startles you. A sharp, high-pitched giggle, almost musical, echoes through the stone hallway. Instinctively, you follow the sound, and find yourself in front of a marble-tiled courtyard where an unexpected figure is holding court. Short, bow-legged, and resplendent in crimson silk, the court dwarf jester stands center stage, tossing a polished mango in the air with one hand while balancing a porcelain plate on the tip of his slippered foot. Meet the man tasked with walking the razor's edge between amusement and annihilation. Historians still argue whether Mughal court jesters were merely entertainers or whether they played a far more dangerous game, saying the things no one else dared say, under the thin and slippery protection of comedy. Whatever the truth, a court jester's real talent wasn't juggling or pratfalls. It was politics. You watch as the jester mocks a minister, gently, carefully, twisting the man's name into a pun that makes the assembled courtiers snicker behind their hands. The minister forces a smile, but you can see the tightness in his jaw. A joke cuts sharper than a scimitar here, and everyone knows it. Jesters were some of the few palace figures allowed to speak openly to the emperor. They could mock, mimic, or critique, all under the banner of entertainment. But it was a perilous tightrope. A joke too pointed could spark a grudge. A performance too weak could lose the emperor's favor. Many a jester's career, and head, ended after a poorly timed quip. Our current jester, whose name you hear whispered as Kota Gopal, seems blessed with an uncanny intuition. He reads the emperor's mood like a seasoned sailor reads the sea. He avoids the sore topics, pokes fun at court protocol, and manages a few risque puns without stepping over invisible boundaries. His tricks are a blend of slapstick and sharp wit, a juggling act with dates and almonds, a mock sword duel where he exaggerates the Emperor's legendary battlefield exploits, turning them into an over-the-top ballet of clumsiness. The courtiers laugh, the Emperor chuckles, and Kotagopal lives to joke another day. A quirky detail for you, many court jesters also doubled as informants. Between gags, they listened, they watched, and they reported. Their humor lulled people into carelessness, and careless whispers are a jester's true currency. It wasn't just about survival, it was about leverage. And the jester's wardrobe? As carefully curated as the Emperor's own robes. Bright colors, exaggerated embroidery, bells on the shoes, the perfect camouflage. You might laugh at the fool in red and gold, but you'd be wise to remember, behind the giggles was a brain-keeping score. You notice Gopal's mango toss becoming more elaborate, now leading in mock failures that draw gasps and laughter. But behind each slip is a practiced calculation, when to be bold, when to retreat. The performance is a mask, but the eyes beneath it are sharp, alert, perpetually calculating. He's not just entertaining, he's surviving. Historians debate whether jesters were ever promoted. Whispered stories suggest that one or two became advisors, cloaked in laughter but deadly serious behind closed doors. After all, who better to advise on human folly than the man paid to mirror it? Gopal ends his act with an exaggerated bow, one leg kicking out so high it nearly topples him over. The Emperor claps once, lazily. It's enough. The jester beams and scampers off, mango tucked into his sash, leaving the courtiers to exchange nervous chuckles and adjust their turbans. You stand there for a moment longer, digesting what you've seen. In a palace where every word could be a weapon, the jester's laughter was his shield, his sword, and his armor. And as you stroll onward, you think, in the Mughal court, sometimes the shortest man carried the heaviest secrets. You leave the courtyard behind, the echoes of carefully measured laughter fading into the distance, and follow a quieter path along the shaded colonnades. Here, the air is crisp and sharp, tinged not with perfume or incense, but with something wilder, more elemental. A flutter of feathers and a sudden screech announce the presence of the next strange profession on your journey, the imperial falconer. You pause at the threshold of a sun-drenched courtyard, and there they are, dozens of birds, each perched on leather-wrapped stands, their hoods decorated with gold embroidery, their curved beaks gleaming. The falconer himself stands in the center, clad in simple, durable robes of indigo and ivory, a heavy gauntlet on one arm and a falcon, sleek and deadly, balanced calmly upon it. Now, keeping birds might sound like an indulgence, a royal hobby, but in the Mughal court, falcons were much more than feathered pets. They were status symbols, diplomatic gifts, even instruments of subtle intimidation. To own a falcon was to display your wealth, your refinement, and your command over nature itself. And for the emperor, a perfectly trained falcon was as vital to his image as his jewels or his soldiers. Historians still argue whether falconry came to India from Persia or Central Asia, but by the time of the Mughals, it had become an imperial obsession, and maintaining a stable of hunting birds was no casual endeavor. These creatures required daily training, a carefully curated diet, fresh quail, goat meat, sometimes even delicacies like duck or partridge, and constant vigilance for signs of illness or temper. You watch as the falconer gently removes the hood from his bird. Its golden eyes blink slowly, adjusting to the light. A signal, a slight flex of his fingers, and the bird launches from his arm, a flash of wings cutting the air as it soars across the courtyard, arcs beautifully, and returns to his fist with surgical precision. The falconer rewards the bird with a morsel of meat, murmuring softly in a language that is more gesture in tone than words. Training falcons wasn't just a job, it was an art. And it was perilous. A falcon with a mind of its own could embarrass an emperor in front of foreign dignitaries. Worse yet, it could attack a guest or refuse to hunt, suggesting the emperor couldn't even command a bird, let alone an empire. There's a famous story, which historians still bicker about, naturally, of a falcon presented as a royal gift to a Mughal emperor. The bird, impeccably trained, performed so flawlessly that the visiting ambassador who gifted it was immediately promoted to a favored status, his petitions granted, his enemies in court suddenly silenced. Whether the story is true or embellished, it underscores the falcon's political weight. But it wasn't all pageantry. Falcons were taken on real hunts, used to catch everything from hares to antelope. These royal expeditions were not just leisure trips but displays of imperial dominance, nature, tamed and conquered, for the amusement of the emperor and his court. The falconer, always nearby, was responsible for ensuring the birds performed to expectation. You edge closer and notice the falconer inspecting another bird's talons, trimming them carefully with a silver file. His belt bristles with tools, tiny knives, vials of salve for injuries, polished hoods lined with velvet. Every item meticulously maintained, because even a small misstep could cost the falcon its edge, and the falconer his head. It's said that some falconers could read a bird's mood just by the way its feathers settled or the tilt of its head. They lived in a world of silent signals and subtle corrections, of instinct honed so sharp it might as well have been a blade. There's even a delightful bit of court gossip. One emperor supposedly favored his falcons so much that he allowed them to roost near his private chambers, believing their sharp cries at dawn were a more noble wake-up call than any bell or gong. Historians still argue whether this was practicality or pure indulgence, but knowing the Mughals, it was probably a lavish mix of both. The falconer releases another bird, and you watch, mesmerized, as it spirals upward, a dark shadow against the blinding blue sky. Here, in a palace obsessed with control, the falconer commands the wild, and the emperor's power is reflected not just in gold and marble, but in wings and talons. You turn away, the rush of air from a diving falcon brushing your face, and think, in the Mughal court, even the birds were political players. And the man who trained them? A king in all but name, ruling over an empire of feathers and fury. The shadow of the soaring falcon slowly dissolves behind you as you wander deeper into the palace's tangled maze. The air shifts again, cool, heavy, and damp now, carrying with it a faint, rhythmic trickle. A sound like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. You follow it, your steps echoing against walls painted with twisting vines and gold filigree, until you come upon a small, windowless chamber centered around a curious device. Here, in this quiet sanctuary of time, you meet the water clock attendant. Perched in the center of the room is a great bronze basin filled with water. Floating in it, a shallow bowl with a tiny hole in its base, just large enough to let the water seep in drop by drop. As the bowl gradually fills, it sinks, marking the passage of time in serene, inescapable inevitability. The water clock, or clepsydra, was one of the palace's best-kept secrets. Forget sundials or candle clocks, those were too dependent on light and flame. Here, the steady, silent dripping of water measured the emperor's day with a precision and dignity fitting for the ruler of half the known world. Historians still argue whether Mughal water clocks were purely ceremonial or whether they played a real role in regulating court schedules. Some claim they were an indulgence, a bit of scientific posturing for visiting dignitaries. Others insist they were deadly serious, tracking not only hours but the emperor's moods, delineating moments for audiences, prayers, meals, and, crucially, decisions. The attendant kneels beside the clock, eyes narrowed, scanning the slow descent of the bowl. Every hour or so, when the bowl sinks completely, he scoops it out, empties it, and begins again. Simple, right? Not exactly. The rate of water flow had to be precisely regulated, no leaks, no blockages. In the dry seasons, evaporation sped things up. In the humid monsoon months, it slowed them down. The attendant is armed with a box of tools, fine needles for clearing the hole, cloths for polishing the bowl, a tiny ladle for adjustments. He works with the quiet devotion of a man who knows his tiny errors can ripple outward like water itself, causing missed appointments, insulted ambassadors, and an emperor kept waiting. And in this palace, nobody kept the emperor waiting. You watch as he carefully measures out a few drops of oil, trickling it onto the water's surface. Oil reduces evaporation, you realize, keeping the water clock ticking with greater accuracy even in the harshest summers. A small detail, a massive consequence. A quirky tidbit? Some Mughals were so obsessed with timekeeping that they commissioned traveling water clocks for their expeditions, portable, jewel-studded devices that attendants like this one would carry with them, ensuring the emperor never lost a second, even on the march. You notice the attendant carries a ledger, thin but meticulously kept. He records each sinking time, adjusting the schedule accordingly. When palace events, weddings, banquets, ceremonies, stretch longer than expected, he is the one who must recalibrate, must silently inform the chief steward that the emperor's patience has an expiration date, measured not in minutes but in sinking bowls. Historians still debate whether the water clock was ever used to schedule public punishments or executions. Some darker chronicles suggest the emperor might deliberately set a clock running and declare, when the bowl sinks, his fate is sealed. You glance at the slow, measured descent of the floating bowl and shiver a little at the thought. The attendant never speaks. He doesn't need to. His authority isn't loud. It's relentless. He commands the very flow of time here, invisible yet undeniable, as vital to the machinery of the court as the emperor's throne itself. As you turn to leave, the bowl reaches its tipping point. It tilts, wobbles, and sinks with a gentle, almost mournful splash. The attendant moves with practiced grace, lifting it out, emptying it, resetting the cycle. Time, in this palace, does not march. It drips, slow and inevitable. And as you step back into the brighter corridors beyond, you realize, in the Mughal palace, even the passing of seconds was a performance, and the man who ruled the water ruled the clock, and, in a way, ruled everything. Leaving behind the quiet dripping of the water clock, you tread softly into a dim, carpeted hall, where the air feels different, thicker, heavier, almost syrupy with stillness. A hush lies here, not the reverent quiet of ceremony but the weightier silence of sleep. You barely breathe as you approach a low doorway, peering inside at the figure hunched over a sheaf of parchment. Welcome to the hidden world of the sleep recorder. Yes, you heard that right. Somewhere between a notary and a dream detective, the sleep recorder's job was to observe and log the emperor's every sleeping movement. Historians still argue whether the practice had real medical roots or if it was just another manifestation of royal paranoia, but either way, it was real enough. Every night, as the emperor retired to his vast, perfumed chamber, canopies of velvet overhead, sandalwood fires burning low in copper braziers, the sleep recorder would take up his position behind an intricately carved screen. There, hidden in shadows, he would listen, watch, and document. You imagine it, the emperor, lying sprawled across a mountain of silk pillows, while just beyond the veil of night, a scribe dips his brush into ink and records. Tossed thrice between second and third hours. Murmured indistinct words at midnight. Coughed, silence resumed. Why? Well, sleep was serious business for a Mughal emperor. A restless night could be seen as a sign, bad dreams, interrupted rest, signs of divine displeasure or hidden illnesses. If the emperor slept badly, ministers might tread lightly the next day. Armies might delay their marches. Ceremonies could be cancelled. One man's insomnia could ripple through an empire. You sidle closer. The recorder tonight is a wiry figure, clad in plain robes, noiseless slippers on his feet. His tools are laid out with military precision, an oil lamp with a shield to dim the glow, a reed pen, sheets of parchment, and a small hourglass to mark intervals. His job is not to sleep, not even to blink for too long. He must catch everything, the slightest shift of a limb, the smallest grunt or sigh. And here's the kicker, the recorder had to be trusted, absolutely and completely. One whispered secret from the emperor's dreams, one leak about a muttered name, could bring ruin. His loyalty was tested more harshly than almost any other palace servant. Betrayal was not an option. Or at least, not a survivable one. Historians love to debate whether the sleep recorder's notes were ever used for political maneuvering. One theory suggests that shrewd courtiers bribed recorders for subtle clues. Did the emperor sleep uneasily the night before a decision? Did he speak the name of a rival in his dreams? True or not, it's delicious to imagine a court minister basing his fortunes on how many times the emperor rolled over in bed. You glance at the recorder's parchment and spot neat, almost calligraphic lines. Spoke a single word, Akhtar. Possibly dream-related. No movement observed between third and fourth intervals. Awoke briefly, called for water. Even in his sleep, the emperor was never alone. A quirky little detail, some emperors, it said, grew suspicious of the practice and tested their recorders with fake mumblings, utter nonsense words or false confessions, to see if the scribe would report them accurately or embellish. Those who passed the test remained. Those who didn't, well, let's just say there are many ways to vanish in a Mughal palace. The recorder's hand moves steadily, unfaltering. His face is blank, impassive. It has to be. He is a mirror to the emperor's unconscious self, reflecting but never interpreting. His job is not to understand, merely to note. You marvel at the patience required, the endless nights spent hunched behind a curtain, listening to another man breathe, shift, dream. Sleep, you think, is the most private act, and here it is, dissected, catalogued, politicized. As you drift away, the recorder turns the hourglass, sand whispering through the narrow neck. Another hour of imperial slumber begins, and the empire holds its breath, waiting to see what the emperor dreams, or doesn't dream, tonight. And you wonder, in a world where even dreams are watched and recorded, where could a man truly be free? You slip away from the chamber of hushed breaths and dreaming emperors, trailing down a narrower hall where the walls are dark with age, the air heavier, almost perfumed. But not the cloying sweetness of rosewater or sandalwood. No, this is different. Warmer. Earthier. You're following a trail that leads you straight to the most unusual bodyguard you've ever encountered. The sandalwood bodyguard. Yes, a bodyguard, but not with sword or shield. His weapon? Aroma. Standing ramrod straight beside a heavy, silk-draped entrance is a man draped not in armor, but in simple robes dyed the faint golden hue of sandalwood. His skin gleams faintly, oiled from head to toe in sandalwood essence so pure it would make modern perfumers weep. Historians still argue whether the sandalwood bodyguard was more symbolism than substance, but in the Mughal court, symbols were substance. Sandalwood was prized not just for its intoxicating scent but for its supposed purifying properties. It cooled the body, calmed the mind, and, most importantly, was believed to ward off evil. The bodyguard's real job? To create an invisible, fragrant shield around the emperor, a barrier against bad humors, foul air, and, some whispered, even evil spirits. A living talisman, walking incense. You step closer, cautiously. He stands so still you half wonder if he's a statue carved from some exquisite wood. Only the faint rise and fall of his chest betrays his humanity. A small bowl rests at his feet, filled with fresh sandalwood paste, alongside a delicate brush for touch-ups. His scent hits you in waves, subtle, not overpowering, but insistent, threading through the air like an unseen tapestry. In a world before antibiotics and air filtration, this was as close as the court could get to breathing purified air. His skin, glistening under the dim torchlight, is not just aesthetic, it's practical. Sandalwood oil cooled the skin during the suffocating Delhi summers, and when applied thickly, created a protective barrier against insects and infection. A bodyguard wrapped in such a sheen was, in theory, less prone to disease, and less likely to bring illness into the emperor's presence. A quirky historical note, some records suggest these bodyguards were trained not just in martial arts but in aromatics, able to identify poison by scent, detect illness by the faint odors of the human body, and even mix emergency remedies from the sandalwood paste they carried. You watch as the sandalwood bodyguard shifts slightly, repositioning his weight with the grace of a dancer. He carries no weapon visible to the eye, but you notice the subtle bulge under his sash where a slender dagger might be hidden, oiled to slide noiselessly free if needed. Scent was his first weapon, steel, his last resort. There's a legend, which historians love to debate, that one emperor refused to enter a room until his sandalwood bodyguard had stood inside it for 3 full minutes, ensuring the air was sweet and free from malevolence. True or not, it speaks to the Mughal belief that scent wasn't mere luxury, it was protection, politics, power. You breathe in deeply, out of curiosity, but also caution. In this palace, even a smell could carry meaning, and here you are, trespassing on one of the emperor's invisible fortresses. The sandalwood bodyguard doesn't acknowledge you. He doesn't blink. He simply exists, still, fragrant, inviolable. And you realize, his job isn't to fight off assassins or fend off blades. His job is subtler, more insidious. To soothe, to mask, to pacify. To turn the very air into a weapon of calm, a wall of tranquility around the most powerful man in the empire. As you step away, you catch one last whiff of that clean, creamy scent, and think, in a world obsessed with control, where even the emperor's dreams were recorded, of course his air would be guarded, too. Of course, he would be swaddled in an invisible cloud of defense, breathing in not just power, but peace. The smell of sandalwood lingers behind you, trailing like an invisible thread as you wander into a grand, vaulted chamber. Here, where the light falls softly on gold-leafed walls and marble floors veined like a river delta, another strange figure bends diligently over a wide, low table. His brush dances across a sheet of parchment with the care of a man signing a treaty. You have stumbled upon the royal manuscript illuminator. To call him a mere painter would be an insult. No, this was the artist entrusted with turning the emperor's words, edicts, poetry, and holy texts into visions so rich, so lavish, they outshone the very jewels in the Mughal treasury. The illuminator before you is hunched in concentration, his brush a slender reed tipped with hair so fine you can barely see it. With it, he lays down infinitesimal strokes of gold, vermilion, lapis blue, and malachite green. Miniature gardens bloom under his hand, delicate vines coil in the margins, and tiny animals, each smaller than a grain of rice, peek from between curls of ink. Historians still argue whether the illuminators were considered mere craftsmen or high artists. The truth is probably somewhere in between. While court painters splashed grand canvases with life-size portraits and battle scenes, the manuscript illuminators worked on a scale so small it bordered on madness. The paint itself was as precious as the emperor's crown. Pigments ground by hand from semi-precious stones, lapis from Afghanistan, malachite from Rajasthan, cinnabar imported from Persia. Gold leaf so thin it floated if you breathed too hard. Brushes made from the eyelashes of calves. Every element spoke not just of artistry but of wealth and control. You peer closer. The illuminator dips his brush in a tiny ceramic palette, then dabs the barest speck of white onto a heron's eye in a riverside scene no bigger than your thumbnail. The patience required is staggering. One quirky fact? Some imperial manuscripts were so opulently illuminated that they were never actually read. They were kept hidden away in treasure rooms, displayed only on rare occasions, more prized for their beauty than their content. Books not as vessels of knowledge, but as objects of power. The illuminator works in silence, broken only by the occasional soft scrape of his stool as he adjusts his posture. His robes are simple, stained at the cuffs with flecks of color. A pot of crushed gold leaf sits at his elbow, gleaming dully in the filtered light. This is not just art, it's politics. A flawlessly illuminated manuscript could commemorate an emperor's triumph, immortalize a dynasty's glory, or sway a skeptical envoy with its dazzling splendor. And the illuminator? He was the unseen hand, the quiet magician behind the illusion. Historians still debate whether any illuminators rose to fame in their own right, or whether they remained forever anonymous, swallowed by the grandeur of the emperors they served. A few signed their works with tiny, hidden monograms, barely a whisper of rebellion in a world that demanded total devotion. You catch a glimpse of the piece he's working on, a scene of paradise, rivers flowing between gardens lush with impossible trees, figures dressed in flowing robes too detailed for the naked eye to truly absorb. It's not merely decoration. It's a statement, look upon my empire, vast and eternal, delicate and invincible. The illuminator leans back for a moment, stretching cramped fingers, then returns to his work with the resignation of a man who understands that perfection is not a goal, it's a requirement. And there's an irony here, isn't there? The emperor who demanded these works likely never looked too closely at them. Perhaps he flipped a few pages, admired the gleam of gold, the flash of indigo, the intricate dance of lines. But the real magic, the hours, the years spent coaxing a world into being on a few inches of parchment, was invisible. The illuminator created beauty that no one dared truly touch. As you step away, the faint smell of pigment and oil follows you. You think of the countless hours, the endless patience, the monastic devotion to craft. In a palace where wealth screamed from every surface, the manuscript illuminator whispered it, page by page, stroke by stroke. And you realize, in the Mughal world, even silence had a golden shine. The scent of crushed minerals and gold dust clings faintly to you as you move on, weaving deeper into the folds of the palace where marble gives way to shaded gardens and shaded gardens to hidden courtyards. Here, among latticed screens and the hum of bees, you stumble onto one of the most peculiar and high-pressure jobs in the imperial household, the mango ripener. Yes, you blink, but it's true. In a court that revered mangoes as the food of paradise, the task of ensuring their perfect ripeness for imperial banquets was no laughing matter. You find the mango ripener crouched under an open canopy, peering intently at a large, woven basket filled with the kingliest of fruits. Each mango is nestled in its own bed of straw, their green-gold skins kissed by the afternoon sun. The ripener's fingers hover delicately over the fruit, testing, tapping, sniffing, not too hard, not too soft, just right. Historians still argue whether the Mughal obsession with mangoes was entirely culinary or whether it carried deeper symbolic meaning, fertility, abundance, divine favor. What's not up for debate is how seriously they took their mangoes. Emperor Akbar reportedly planted an orchard with over 100,000 mango trees. John, your wax lyrical about their sweetness. Shah Jahan? Let's just say a poorly ripened mango in his banquet could cause more royal ire than a missing diamond. The mango ripener's job was a fine art. Mangoes had to be plucked at the right moment, not when they were ripe, but just before. Then the real work began. They were wrapped, nested, sometimes layered with hay, sometimes left exposed, depending on their temperament. Yes, temperament, because each variety of mango behaved differently. Alfonsos, Langras, Dasheries, each had its own personality, and a good ripener knew them like old friends or dangerous rivals. Today, the ripener is performing a final inspection. A small blade, no bigger than a thumbnail, is used to make the tiniest nick in the skin of a particularly promising mango. The cut releases a scent, heady, floral, with that hint of resin. He sniffs carefully, eyes half closed, weighing the ripeness not just with his nose but his very soul. A quirky aside? Some ripeners used elaborate techniques involving warm coals, wrapping the fruits in cloths, or even layering them with raw rice to coax perfect ripeness. There's even an account of a Mughal courtier who claimed he could tell the exact number of days a mango needed simply by how it sounded when gently flicked, a skill that historians still argue was either genius or pure bravado. The mango ripener was no mere servant. His timing could make or break a feast. Present a mango that was underripe, fibrous, bland, and you risked souring the emperor's mood. Overripe, mushy, fermenting? Unforgivable. The perfect mango, sliced and served chilled on silver platters, was not just a dish, it was a moment of near-religious experience. And of course, not all mangoes were eaten. Some were pressed into sherbets, others into delicate pastes for sweets. But even then, their ripeness determined the success of the final creation. A poorly chosen mango could ruin 100 dishes. You watch as the ripener selects a few choice fruits and arranges them reverently into a velvet-lined box. This was no casual snack run, this was the delivery of an offering to a mortal deity. Only the most perfect mangoes would travel up the cool, shadowed corridors to the emperor's private table, borne by silent-footed servants trained to handle them as delicately as they would a newborn prince. The ripener wipes his hands on a cloth and leans back with a sigh that carries the weight of his strange, fragrant responsibility. Tomorrow, he'll do it all again, new fruits, new risks, new chance for triumph or disaster. As you walk away, you find yourself smiling. In a palace where intrigue and ambition were constant, where fortunes rose and fell on whims, it seems fitting that even the humble mango was elevated to the highest stakes. In the Mughal court, perfection wasn't a goal, it was a demand. And somewhere between the ripening of mangoes and the ripening of empires, men like this found their place, unseen, unsung, but absolutely essential. The sweet, almost syrupy scent of mangoes trails behind you as you wander farther along the shaded colonnades. You pass a lattice window, glimpse a sun-baked courtyard, and wrinkle your nose, because the next job awaiting you lies not in perfume or poetry, but in something far grittier. You've arrived at the unglamorous but strangely political domain of the master of elephant dung disposal. Yes, elephant dung disposal. In a Mughal palace. You step cautiously into a bustling yard behind the imperial stables, where the sun beats down on a small army of workers. At their center, overseeing it all with the air of a seasoned general, is the master himself. He stands tall, arms folded, surveying steaming piles of what one might delicately call royal waste. The Mughal emperors loved their elephants. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, housed in grand stables more luxurious than some human homes. They were fed the best grains, bathed in perfumed water, draped in embroidered silks. But what goes in must come out, and with creatures that size, well, the out was prodigious. Historians still argue whether the disposal of elephant dung was primarily a health matter or whether it was also tied to deeper symbolism, clearing ways to maintain the purity of the emperor's domain. Whatever the reason, the job was serious. The stench of dung, left unchecked, could undermine the palace's aura of divine cleanliness. It could also attract disease, flies, and all manner of less visible but more insidious threats. The master of dung disposal wasn't just a glorified garbage man. He was a logistical genius. His teams had to operate with military precision, collecting, transporting, and disposing of the waste far from palace grounds without disturbing the court's delicate olfactory balance. You watch as workers shovel dung into carts lined with fresh straw and aromatic herbs, cloves, neem leaves, and camphor, to tamp down the smell. The carts are then covered with heavy cloths and wheeled away through discreet back gates. But where did it all go? A quirky historical tidbit, elephant dung wasn't just waste. It was resource. Dried and cured, it made excellent fuel for fires. Mixed with clay, it became building material for humble homes. Some even say it was used in the creation of early paper, the fibers providing the perfect pulp. And here's the real kicker, access to the disposal routes was a coveted secret. Some factions in the palace allegedly fought bitterly to control the trade of what the elephants left behind. Waste management turned into an invisible economy, a slow river of power flowing just beneath the marble floors. The master strides past you, shouting orders. His tunic is plain, practical, but you notice the fine embroidery at the cuffs, a subtle reminder that even the dirtiest jobs here came cloaked in a thin veneer of courtly elegance. He carries a tally stick, notched with the day's collections, and a perfumed cloth tucked into his belt to dab at his nose. You marvel at the absurdity of it all. In a palace where jewels were measured by the bucketful and mangoes by the whisper of ripeness, even dung had to be managed with meticulous precision and political savvy. Historians still debate whether the master had official court rank, but some records suggest he sat at court assemblies, his authority, while malodorous, respected. After all, a clean palace was a powerful palace. No flies, no disease, no embarrassment to foreign visitors. As you tiptoe past a cart being trundled away, the smell mitigated but not defeated, you reflect on a simple truth. In the Mughal Empire, no job was too small, too strange, or too stinky to be elevated into an art form. And here, in the shadow of the stables, among the heaving piles of what most would rather not think about, empires were quietly, daily, maintained. Escaping the last, stubborn traces of the stable's more fragrant byproducts, you follow a winding path back toward the main palace. The air grows cooler again, the architecture grander, until you find yourself stepping into a small, dark chamber where stars seem to glow on parchment. This, you realize, is the sacred domain of the palace astrologer. Now, you might assume the astrologer's job was all crystals and incantations, but here, oh no, it was serious science laced with a heavy dose of theater. The emperor depended on the astrologer not just for personal predictions but for guidance on matters of war, marriage, and empire itself. Historians still argue whether Mughal emperors genuinely believed in the astrologer's readings or whether they simply enjoyed the grand spectacle of it all, the charts, the calculations, the solemn pronouncements. Either way, a nod from the stars could make or break a dynasty. You edge closer. The astrologer sits cross-legged on a rug woven with constellations, his tools arrayed around him, polished brass astrolabes, delicate compasses, richly illustrated manuscripts covered in swirling Arabic script, and a small wooden box filled with precious stones, each one corresponding to a planet. The astrologer traces the movement of a star chart with a finger inked in henna, whispering under his breath. He wears a robe heavy with embroidery, suns, moons, and starbursts stitched into dark velvet. A turban the color of midnight wraps his head, and dangling from one ear is a small sapphire, glittering like a captured sky. The stakes for his work are sky-high, literally. Important state events like coronations, battles, or even the launching of great architectural projects, hello, Taj Mahal, couldn't proceed without the astrologer's blessing. Births and deaths were timed against the stars. Arranged marriages were either approved or postponed depending on planetary alignments. And if something went wrong? If a battle was lost or a monsoon delayed, blame didn't always fall on generals or engineers. It could fall squarely on the man who read the stars. You lean in as he murmurs, consulting a massive, gold-edged tome that looks heavy enough to crush a smaller man. His brush dances across a sheet of parchment, sketching complicated horoscopes, circles within circles, lines radiating like spokes on a wheel, cryptic glyphs marking the paths of unseen forces. A quirky aside? Some emperors were known to demand 2 or 3 astrologers' readings on major decisions, playing them against each other like cautious gamblers hedging bets. Others, more superstitious, refused to so much as pick a new robe without a favorable horoscope. You watch as the astrologer sets aside his tools and lifts a single emerald from his wooden box, turning it in the lamplight. Emeralds were said to appease Mercury, the trickster planet, patron of communication and cunning. A necessary charm, perhaps, when navigating the slippery politics of court life. Historians still debate whether the Mughal astrologers practiced pure astrology or blended it with elements of astronomy, mathematics, and even early medicine. Some were scholars of dizzying intellect, fluent in Persian, Sanskrit, and Arabic, drawing on traditions from Greece, India, and beyond. Others, perhaps, were better showmen than scientists, but in the Mughal court, spectacle often mattered as much as skill. As you watch the astrologer gently blow across the star chart, scattering a fine dusting of sand to set the ink, you can almost hear the palace breathing in time with the planets. The emperor, wherever he is, will wait to hear the verdict of the skies before he lifts a finger. You take a step back, not wanting to disturb the sacred geometry unfolding before you. In a palace where scent guarded the air, curtains were choreographed, and mangoes were ripened like royal secrets, it seems fitting that even fate itself would be measured, calculated, and neatly penned in lines of ink. And you think, in the Mughal court, where life balanced precariously on so many invisible scales, what better safety net than the stars themselves? You slip away from the astrologer's chamber, your mind still spinning with visions of constellations stitched into velvet skies. Down the corridor, the palace begins to hush, the day folding itself into twilight. One last curious post waits for you, one more oddity in this labyrinth of strange careers. Past gilded screens and silver doors, you come at last to the quiet, sun-dappled courtyard of the keeper of the emperor's pet antelope. Yes, antelope. Pet. With its own keeper. You step cautiously onto the mosaic floor, trying not to disturb the delicate serenity. Under a flowering neem tree lies the creature itself, a slim, tawny antelope, legs neatly tucked under its body, chewing lazily on a sprig of fresh clover. Beside it, perched on a low stool, sits the keeper, carefully combing through the antelope's fur with a bone-handled brush. At first glance, it's almost comical, the idea of an emperor lavishing attention on a wild creature better suited for the open plains. But here in the Mughal court, exotic pets were more than diversions. They were status symbols, conversation pieces, reflections of power over nature. Historians still argue whether the pet antelope was a beloved companion or simply another jewel in the emperor's living treasury, alongside his menagerie of elephants, lions, cheetahs, and rare birds. But in court gossip, the antelope held a special place. It was quiet, graceful, unobtrusive, qualities prized in a court full of schemers and loudmouthed sycophants. You watch as the keeper dips his fingers into a small pot of rosewater and gently massages the antelope's ears. The creature closes its eyes, blissful. Its hooves are polished to a subtle sheen, its horns wound with silk ribbons for ceremonial occasions. The antelope has its own feeding schedule, its own quarters lined with hand-woven rugs, its own physician for times of illness. A quirky tidbit? The antelope's diet was meticulously curated. Tender grasses, sweet dates, the occasional pomegranate seed, all sourced at tremendous cost to keep its digestion as royal as its surroundings. Some say the emperor believed the antelope brought good fortune, others whisper it was a living symbol of his ability to tame even the untamable. The keeper's role, then, wasn't just to feed and groom. He was guardian, companion, therapist, and, at times, secret keeper. The emperor, it's said, often visited the antelope in moments of frustration or solitude, finding in its gentle eyes and silent presence a rare kind of peace unavailable in the noisy theater of the court. Historians still debate whether the emperor's affection for the antelope ever swayed political decisions. There's a persistent, if unproven, rumor that one envoy was granted audience not because of his eloquence or rank, but because he gifted a particularly fine silk for the antelope's lounging platform. You shift closer and the antelope flicks an ear, watching you with calm, liquid eyes. It doesn't move, trusting in the keeper's steady hand, in the slow, careful rhythm of brush strokes and soft murmured words. The keeper hums a tune you don't recognize, something lilting and old, a melody that seems to weave through the leaves above like a breeze. And you realize, in a world obsessed with control, appearance, and power, the emperor's pet antelope was a quiet rebellion. It demanded nothing, plotted nothing, threatened no one. It simply existed, graceful, unbothered, serene. You watch as the keeper lifts a fine cotton cloth and gently wipes the antelope's muzzle, murmuring praise in a language older than empires. There's devotion here, but not the kind demanded by kings or generals. It's quieter, more honest. As the sky deepens to indigo and the first stars blink awake, you turn to leave, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the scene. The antelope shifts, stretches its slender neck, and resumes its slow chewing. The keeper never glances up, lost in the simple, sacred ritual of care. And you smile, because it seems fitting that after all the politics and perfumes, the spies and the scribes, the curtain whisperers and the mango ripeners. The last strange job in the Mughal palace is the simplest: a man, an animal, and the silent agreement between them that sometimes survival is about stillness, not struggle. The palace grows quieter now. The torches gutter lower in their sconces, their light soft and golden against the marble. Somewhere, a fountain murmurs gently, its waters weaving a lullaby. The last courtiers drift away like leaves on a slow river, their embroidered slippers silent on the cool stone. You let yourself breathe, deeply and slowly, the day's strange parade of professions slipping into the shadows behind you. The scent of sandalwood lingers faintly, the image of jeweled manuscripts and velvet-clad falcons floats just out of reach. Above, the sky drapes itself in a tapestry of stars, the same stars once charted by an imperial astrologer for kings long gone. And you feel it, the gentle pull of sleep, as soft and insistent as a silken curtain drawn over tired eyes. In the end, perhaps it doesn't matter whether you warmed beds or ripened mangoes, whispered curtains or guarded antelopes. In the Mughal palace, every strange job had its place, every small ritual its purpose. The world narrows to the hush of your own breathing, the distant hum of water, the cool brush of air against your skin. Rest easy now. The empire will keep spinning its delicate dance of scent, silk, and starlight without you for a while longer. Good night, dreamer. Sweet dreams.